I've been married to Sophia for 9 years. We have an 8-year-old daughter named Ellie. For the past 3 years, I've known something was off, but I couldn't prove it. Last Thursday at Thanksgiving dinner, I finally got all the confirmation I needed, and now I'm about to execute a plan I've been working on for months. Let me back up. Sophia used to be a surgeon. She drove a Bentley, lived in a penthouse, had everything figured out. That was before we met. When I married her, she told me she left that life behind because she wanted something simpler and more meaningful. She works as a cashier at our local store now. I believed her story about wanting a different life, about choosing love over money. I'm an accountant at a mid-sized firm. Nothing fancy, but we've made it work. About 3 years ago, I started noticing things. Sophia would get texts at weird hours and immediately flip her phone face down. She'd step outside to take calls. Her old iPhone would buzz with notifications she'd quickly dismiss. When I asked about it, she'd say it was just spam or work stuff. But cashiers don't get emergency calls at 2 a.m. Then, there were the bills. Our phone plan should have cost maybe $60 for both our lines. But I noticed we were being charged for a third line I'd never seen. When I asked Sophia about it, she got defensive and said it was probably some billing error she'd handle. That was 18 months ago. The third line is still there. I started paying closer attention after that. Sophia would disappear for hours on weekends, claiming she was grocery shopping or running errands. But she'd come back empty-handed or with random stuff we didn't need. She'd get quiet and distracted, constantly checking her phone. When I'd try to see what she was looking at, she'd snap it shut and tell me I was being paranoid. The breaking point came last Thursday. We were at Sophia's mother's house for Thanksgiving. The whole family was there. Sophia's sister Gail, her mother, a few cousins, and us. Everyone had been drinking wine with dinner, and the conversation was flowing pretty freely. Gail has always been the type to say exactly what she's thinking, especially after a few glasses. We were sitting around the table finishing our main course when Gail suddenly grabbed her wine glass, stood up, and made this announcement that changed everything. She looked directly at Sophia and said she was tired of everyone pretending like nothing was happening. She told the entire table that Sophia went from being a successful surgeon who drove a Bentley to working as a cashier, and that her ex-husband Ray still pays her phone bill because he feels sorry for her. But here's the part that made me see red. Gail said everyone at the table could see those 2 a.m. texts Sophia tries to hide from me. She said Ray has been checking on Sophia because he knows how hard things are for her now. The whole table went quiet, and I could feel everyone staring at me to see my reaction. Sophia started giggling nervously and tried to play it off. She said Ray was just checking to make sure she was okay because he knew how difficult the transition had been for her. Her mother jumped in and said at least one man still treated her right. I was sitting there trying to process what I just heard when my 8-year-old daughter looked up from her plate and asked if Uncle Ray was her real daddy. That question hit me like a freight train. I'd never heard Sophia mention anyone named Ray before, let alone refer to him as Uncle Ray to our daughter. But apparently, Ellie knew about him well enough to call him Uncle. I realized in that moment that there had been conversations and interactions happening behind my back for years. The entire table was staring at me, waiting for my reaction. I could have exploded right there. I could have demanded answers and started a screaming match in front of everyone, but I've been preparing for something like this for months. Instead, I calmly got up from my chair, walked to the kitchen, and started refilling everyone's wine glasses. When I came back to the dining room, I asked who wanted pie. Everyone just stared at me like I'd lost my mind, but I served dessert like nothing had happened. We finished dinner, helped clean up, and drove home in complete silence. Sophia kept glancing at me like she was waiting for me to bring it up, but I didn't say a word. I've learned that the best way to handle situations like this is to stay calm and stick to your plan. See, I haven't just been sitting around feeling sorry for myself these past 3 years. I've been documenting everything, gathering information, and preparing for exactly this moment. I know about the secret phone line. I know about the late-night texts. I have copies of phone records going back 2 years. I know Ray's full name, where he works, and where he lives. I even know he's been paying for more than just Sophia's phone bill. What Sophia doesn't know is that I've been building my own financial independence this whole time. I've been saving money in accounts she doesn't know about. I've been networking with people in positions that could help me if I needed it. I've been preparing for the day when I'd have enough evidence to take action. That day came 6 days ago when my phone started ringing at 3:47 a.m. I had 73 missed calls and 41 text messages, all saying emergency in various forms. The voicemails were just Sophia screaming, not crying, not explaining what was wrong, just screaming like someone was attacking her. I'm not going to lie. Part of me wanted to ignore those calls. After what happened at Thanksgiving, part of me thought maybe whatever emergency she was having was something Ray could handle since he's been taking care of her for years anyway. but I answered the phone on the 74th call. What I heard on the other end of that call confirmed everything I'd suspected and gave me the final piece I needed to move forward with my plan. Sophia wasn't in physical danger. She wasn't hurt or being threatened. She was panicking because her perfect little secret arrangement with Ray had just blown up in her face, and she needed me to fix it. I'm not going to fix it. I'm going to use it. The next few days are going to be very interesting for everyone involved. I've spent 3 years being the understanding husband who believed his wife's story about wanting a simpler life. I've spent 3 years being patient while she maintained a secret relationship with her ex-husband behind my back. I've spent 3 years watching her let another man pay our bills while pretending to be committed to our marriage. That ends now. Update 1. The comments on my last post have been incredible. You guys really understand what I'm dealing with here. Some of you asked what Ray's emergency actually was. And trust me, it's even worse than I thought. So remember those 73 missed calls and the screaming voicemails? I finally answered on call number 74, and what Sophia told me made everything crystal clear. Ray's wife, Zoe, had been going through their bank statements for their taxes and found thousands of dollars in transfers to Sophia over the past 3 years. We're talking about more than just a phone bill here. Ray had been sending Sophia nearly $800 every month. $800. Every single month. For 3 years. That's almost $30,000 that this man has been sending to my wife, while I've been working overtime to cover our mortgage, our groceries, our daughter's school expenses, everything. And Sophia never said a word about it. When Zoe confronted Ray about the transfers, he apparently broke down and told her everything. He'd been supporting Sophia financially because he felt guilty about their divorce. He told his wife that Sophia had given up her medical career to marry me, and that she was struggling to adjust to a lower income. He painted this whole picture of Sophia as this tragic figure who'd sacrificed everything for love and was now barely scraping by. But here's what Ray didn't know, and what Sophia never told him. We weren't struggling. I make decent money as an accountant. We have savings. We own our house. The only reason we might have seemed like we were struggling is because Sophia was taking Ray's money and hiding it from me. When Zoe found out about the transfers, she gave Ray an ultimatum. Either he stops sending money to his ex-wife immediately, or she files for divorce. Ray chose his current marriage over his guilt about his ex-wife, which meant Sophia's secret income was about to disappear. That's why she was calling me at 3:47 a.m. screaming. Not because someone was breaking into our house or because she was in danger, but because her financial safety net was being yanked away and she didn't know how to tell me about it without admitting she'd been lying for years. But I didn't let her off the hook that easily. When I answered that 74th call, I acted like I had no idea what was happening. I asked her what the emergency was, where she was, if she needed me to call the police. She kept saying she needed me to come get her, that something terrible had happened, that she needed my help right away. She was at Ray's house. At 3:47 in the morning, she'd driven there when Ray called her to tell her about Zoe finding the bank statements. She'd been there for hours trying to convince him to keep the money transfers secret from his wife, but by the time she arrived, Zoe had already seen everything. So I drove over there, not because I wanted to help Sophia, but because I wanted to see this situation with my own eyes. I wanted to meet Ray face to face and understand exactly how deep this deception went. Ray's house is in one of those expensive neighborhoods with the big driveways and the perfectly maintained lawns. When I pulled up, there were 3 cars in the driveway: Ray's BMW, Sophia's little Honda, and what I assumed was Zoe's Mercedes. The lights were on in what looked like the kitchen, and I could see people moving around inside. I knocked on the door and Ray answered. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. Behind him, I could see Sophia sitting at their kitchen table with tissues scattered around her, and Zoe standing by the counter with her arms crossed looking absolutely furious. Ray tried to explain the situation to me like I was walking into some kind of tragic misunderstanding. He told me that he and Sophia had been friends since their divorce, that he'd been helping her financially because he knew the transition from surgeon to retail worker had been difficult for her. He said Zoe had misunderstood the nature of their relationship and that there was nothing inappropriate happening. But Zoe wasn't buying it, and neither was I. She told Ray that friends don't send $800 a month to each other for 3 years without their spouses knowing about it. She said the secrecy made it obvious that everyone involved knew this arrangement was inappropriate. Then Sophia tried to explain herself to me. She said she'd been embarrassed to tell me about Ray's help because she didn't want me to feel like I wasn't providing enough for our family. She said she'd been using the money for little extras, things to make our life more comfortable without putting strain on my income. That's when I started asking specific questions. I asked her what extras she'd been buying with $800 a month for 3 years. I asked her why she'd never mentioned these extras to me if they were making our life more comfortable. I asked her where this money had been going, if not into our joint accounts. She couldn't answer any of those questions without contradicting her own story. She started saying the money had gone toward groceries and household expenses, but I handle our finances, and I knew exactly what we spent on those things. Then she said she'd been saving it for Ellie's college fund, but we already had a college fund that I contributed to every month. Finally, she admitted that she'd been keeping the money in a separate account that I didn't know about. She said she'd wanted to surprise me someday with a big purchase or a vacation, something special that would show me how much she appreciated everything I did for our family. A secret account with nearly $30,000 in it. Money that came from her ex-husband. Money that she'd been hiding from me for 3 years while I worked overtime to pay for everything we needed. Ray kept trying to defend the arrangement. He said he'd never meant for it to cause problems in Sophia's marriage, that he'd only been trying to help someone he cared about. He said he'd stop the transfers immediately if that's what everyone wanted, but that he didn't understand why everyone was treating this like some kind of betrayal. Zoe shut that down real quick. She told Ray that sending money to his ex-wife without telling his current wife absolutely was a betrayal. She said the fact that Sophia had been hiding the money from her husband made it even worse. She said both of them had been lying to their spouses for years and that the lies were just as damaging as the money. That's when I realized I had everything I needed to move forward with my plan. I had Ray and Zoe as witnesses to Sophia's admission about the secret account. I had confirmation that this had been going on for 3 years. I had proof that both Sophia and Ray knew this arrangement required secrecy because they knew it was wrong. But instead of confronting them right there, I did something that surprised everyone in that room. I thanked Ray for his honesty. I told him I appreciated him explaining the situation and that I understood he'd been trying to help. I told Zoe that I didn't blame her for being upset and that she had every right to demand transparency in her marriage. Then I told Sophia we should go home and talk about this privately. I said we had a lot to discuss, but that we should handle it as a family rather than involving Ray and Zoe any further in our personal business. The drive home was silent, but I could see Sophia looking at me like she couldn't figure out what I was thinking. She kept waiting for me to explode, to start yelling at her or demanding explanations. But I've been planning for this moment for too long, to waste it on an emotional outburst in the car. When we got home, that's when the real conversation started. And Reddit, that conversation lasted until sunrise and confirmed every suspicion I'd had about what's really been happening in my marriage. Update 2. Reddit, I am furious. The conversation I had with Sophia when we got home revealed something so much worse than I imagined. You guys thought the secret bank account was bad? Wait until you hear what she's actually been spending Ray's money on. So we get home around 5 a.m., and I told Sophia we needed to talk about everything that had just happened. She immediately started with the waterworks, telling me how sorry she was that I had to find out this way, how embarrassed she felt about keeping secrets from me, how she never meant for things to get this complicated. I let her talk for about 10 minutes before I started asking the real questions. I told her I wanted to see the bank statements for this secret account. I wanted to know exactly how much money Ray had sent her and exactly what she'd spent it on. She tried to tell me that she didn't have the statements with her, that they were at work or in her car or some other nonsense. That's when I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I'd taken of our cell phone bills for the past 2 years. I'd been documenting the third-line charges, the overage fees, the weird patterns in our monthly billing. I told her I knew she'd been getting money from Ray for way longer than just the past few months, and that I had proof of their ongoing contact going back years. She broke down and admitted that Ray had been sending her money for almost 3 years, but she insisted it wasn't what I thought. She said Ray felt guilty about their divorce because he'd been the one to end their marriage. She said he'd left her for another woman, Zoe, while Sophia was dealing with a malpractice lawsuit that eventually forced her to stop practicing medicine. This was the first time I'd heard any of this backstory, by the way. In 9 years of marriage, Sophia had never mentioned a malpractice lawsuit. She'd never told me that Ray had left her for another woman. She'd always presented their divorce as a mutual decision between two people who'd grown apart. But here's the thing that made me see red. She told me that Ray had been sending the money specifically to help with Ellie's expenses. Not household expenses, not groceries, not any of the things she'd claimed earlier. Ellie's expenses. I asked her what expenses an 8-year-old could possibly have that cost $800 a month. That's when she admitted that she'd been using Ray's money to pay for Ellie's private school tuition, her gymnastics classes, her piano lessons, her summer camp, everything that I thought we were stretching our budget to afford. Everything. For 3 years, I've been working overtime and cutting back on my own expenses so we could give Ellie the best opportunities. I've been packing lunch every day instead of buying it so we could afford her piano lessons. I've been driving my car until it practically fell apart so we could pay her school tuition. Meanwhile, Sophia had nearly $30,000 in secret money that was covering all of these expenses. But wait, it gets worse. I asked her why she'd been hiding this if the money was legitimately for Ellie's benefit. Why not tell me that Ray wanted to contribute to his ex-stepdaughter's expenses? Why not be transparent about the arrangement if it was really just about helping our daughter? That's when she admitted the real reason she'd kept it secret. She said Ray had made it clear that the money came with conditions. He wanted regular updates about Ellie's progress in school. He wanted photos from her gymnastics meets and piano recitals. He wanted to be kept informed about her daily life, her friends, her interests, everything. Basically, Ray had been buying access to information about my daughter, and Sophia had been selling it to him for $800 a month. I asked her if Ray had ever asked to see Ellie in person, if he'd ever suggested meeting her or having any kind of relationship with her. She said he'd mentioned it a few times, but that she'd always told him it would be too confusing for Ellie and too complicated for our marriage. But then she admitted something that made me realize how deep this deception really went. She said that sometimes when she took Ellie to her activities, Ray would happen to be there too, just coincidentally. He'd be at the same coffee shop near the gymnastics studio. He'd be at the park where Ellie's softball team practiced. He'd be at the grocery store where we usually shopped on weekends. These weren't coincidences. Ray had been stalking my family, and Sophia had been enabling it by giving him our schedule information. I asked her how long this had been going on, and she said it started about 18 months ago. Ray had apparently become more interested in having some kind of connection to Ellie as she got older and started developing her own personality and interests. Sophia said she'd thought it was harmless because he never approached them or tried to interact with Ellie directly. But here's what really pushed me over the edge. I asked Sophia if she understood that what she'd been doing was essentially facilitating a grown man's obsession with our 8-year-old daughter. I asked her if she realized that taking money in exchange for information about a child's daily activities and whereabouts was completely inappropriate regardless of who the man was. She got defensive and said that Ray wasn't a stranger, that he'd been part of Ellie's life before I came along, that he'd helped raise her during the early years of her life. She said Ray had just as much right to know about Ellie's development as any other family member. That's when I told her that Ray had no rights to Ellie at all. Ray was not Ellie's biological father. Ray was not her legal guardian. Ray was not even her stepfather anymore since he and Sophia had been divorced for over a decade. Ray was just a man who was paying my wife for information about my daughter. Sophia tried to argue that it wasn't that simple, that relationships don't just disappear when people get divorced, that Ray had genuinely cared about Ellie and wanted what was best for her. She said the money had allowed Ellie to have opportunities she wouldn't have had otherwise, and that Ray's interest in her life came from a place of love, not obsession. I told her that if Ray really wanted what was best for Ellie, he would have respected the boundaries of our marriage and our family. He would have sent the money through proper channels with my knowledge and consent. He would have been transparent about his motivations instead of creating a secret arrangement that required lying to multiple spouses. But by this point in our conversation, I'd heard everything I needed to hear. Sophia had admitted to taking money from her ex-husband for 3 years. She'd admitted to sharing information about our daughter's daily life and activities. She'd admitted to facilitating secret surveillance of our family. She'd admitted to lying to me about our financial situation while I worked overtime to pay for expenses that were already covered. That's when I told her that our conversation was over and that she needed to start thinking about what she was going to do next. I told her that Ray's money was gone now that Zoe had discovered the arrangement, which meant that starting immediately, all of Ellie's expenses were going to have to come out of our household budget. But here's the thing. Sophia didn't know. I'd already started implementing my revenge plan months ago. I'd been preparing for exactly this scenario, and I was ready to execute the next phase. See, while Sophia had been building her secret financial relationship with Ray, I'd been building something too. I'd been documenting every instance of unusual behavior, every late-night text, every unexplained absence. I'd been quietly gathering information about Ray's current life, his marriage to Zoe, his financial situation, his business relationships. Most importantly, I'd been building a case file that would demonstrate a pattern of inappropriate contact between a divorced man and his ex-wife's current family, a pattern that involved money changing hands, information being shared without consent, and surveillance of a minor child. Tomorrow morning, I'm implementing the final phase of my plan. Ray thinks his only problem is an angry wife who found some bank statements. Sophia thinks her only problem is explaining her secrets to me. They have no idea what's actually about to hit them. Final update. Reddit? It's been 3 weeks since my last update, and I'm finally ready to tell you how this all played out. Those of you who've been following this story know that I spent years preparing for this moment. Well, I executed my plan and the results exceeded even my expectations. Remember how I told you I'm an accountant? What I didn't mention is that I specialize in forensic accounting for divorce cases. I know exactly how to track financial irregularities, document patterns of deceptive behavior, and present evidence in ways that destroy people's credibility. I've been using these skills to build an airtight case against both Ray and Sophia for the past 18 months. The morning after our sunrise conversation, I started making phone calls. First call went to Ray's employer. See, during my months of research, I'd discovered that Ray works for a financial services company that handles retirement accounts for school districts. Companies like that have very strict policies about employees engaging in any behavior that could be perceived as inappropriate contact with minors, especially when money is involved. I had documented evidence of Ray's payments to Sophia, screenshots of text messages about Ellie's schedule, and photos I'd taken of Ray at various locations where he'd been conducting surveillance of our family. I presented all of this to Ray's Human Resources Director as a concerned parent reporting suspicious behavior by one of their employees. The HR director was very interested in my documentation, especially the part about Ray using financial transactions to gain access to information about a child's daily activities and whereabouts. She told me they would be conducting an immediate investigation and that Ray would be suspended pending the outcome. My second call went to the private school where Ellie had been enrolled. I explained to the principal that there had been an unauthorized person receiving detailed information about my daughter's activities and whereabouts, and that this person had been using that information to conduct surveillance of her at various locations. I provided them with copies of my documentation showing Ray's presence at school events and nearby locations. The school took this very seriously because they have strict policies about protecting student information and preventing unauthorized contact with their students. They immediately revoked any permissions that had been granted for Sophia to share information about Ellie's attendance, activities, or schedule. They also banned Ray from school property and notified their security staff to watch for him at future events. But here's where my plan got really effective. My third call went to Zoe. I'd been watching Zoe's social media for months, and I knew she was very active in her community. She volunteered with local charities, attended neighborhood association meetings, and was generally well-connected with other families in her social circle. She also had two teenage daughters from her first marriage who attended the same school district where Ray's company handled retirement accounts. I called Zoe and told her I thought she deserved to know the full extent of what Ray had been doing behind her back. I shared my documentation with her, including evidence that Ray's surveillance of Ellie had extended to learning about her friends, her teachers, and other families in our community. I explained that Ray had essentially been using his access to Sophia to gather information about multiple children, not just Ellie. Zoe was horrified. She immediately understood that Ray's behavior represented a potential danger to other families in their community, including her own daughters. She told me she was going to make sure everyone in their social circle knew what Ray had been doing, and she did exactly that. Within 48 hours, Zoe had shared my documentation with the parents at her daughter's school, her neighborhood association, her volunteer organizations, and her extended family. Ray went from being a respected member of their community to being known as the man who paid his ex-wife for information about children and conducted surveillance of families. But I wasn't done with Ray yet. My final move against him involved his business relationships. During my research, I discovered that Ray had several clients who trusted him with their personal financial information, specifically because he marketed himself as a family-oriented professional who understood the importance of protecting children's futures. I sent my documentation to every single one of Ray's major clients, along with a letter explaining that they might want to reconsider working with someone who had been engaging in inappropriate contact with minors. I pointed out that someone who would secretly pay for access to information about children's daily activities might not be the kind of person they wanted handling their retirement savings. Ray lost 6 major clients within a week. His company, already dealing with the HR investigation, decided they couldn't afford the liability of keeping him employed. He was terminated for violating company policies regarding conduct that could damage the firm's reputation. Now for Sophia. My approach with her was different because I needed to make sure Ellie was protected throughout the process. I'd already consulted with a family attorney months earlier, so I was prepared to file for immediate emergency custody if necessary. I presented the attorney with my documentation showing that Sophia had been sharing information about Ellie's whereabouts with someone who was conducting surveillance of our daughter, and that she'd been facilitating this arrangement in exchange for money. The attorney told me that Sophia's behavior constituted a serious breach of parental responsibility and that I had grounds for emergency custody modification. We filed the paperwork immediately, requesting that Sophia's unsupervised access to Ellie be suspended until she could demonstrate that she was no longer engaging in behavior that put our daughter at risk. But here's the part that really destroyed Sophia financially. As part of the custody proceedings, I was required to provide a complete financial disclosure. This is where my accounting skills really came in handy. I had documented every penny of Ray's payments to Sophia, every expense that had been double paid between his money and our household budget, and every instance where Sophia had misrepresented our financial situation. The court appointed a forensic accountant to verify my findings, and they confirmed that Sophia had been hiding approximately $30,000 in income over 3 years. This had implications for our tax filings, our mortgage application from 2 years ago, and several other financial documents where Sophia had signed statements certifying that she'd disclosed all household income. Sophia suddenly found herself facing potential tax penalties, mortgage fraud investigations, and the possibility of having to pay back several $1,000s in government benefits that she'd received based on understated income levels. Her secret nest egg of $30,000 disappeared almost overnight in attorney fees and penalty payments. But the real blow came when the judge awarded me primary custody of Ellie and ordered that Sophia's visitation be supervised until she completed parenting classes focused on protecting children from inappropriate adult contact. The judge was particularly concerned about Sophia's willingness to share information about Ellie's daily activities with an adult who was using that information for surveillance purposes. Sophia went from having equal custody and receiving $800 a month from Ray to having supervised visitation, no financial support from her ex-husband, and massive legal bills that consumed her entire savings account. The aftermath has been exactly what I hoped it would be. Ray lost his job, his reputation in the community, and most of his clients. His marriage to Zoe is hanging by a thread because she's told everyone they know about his inappropriate behavior with children. He's had to move out of their neighborhood because the other parents made it clear he wasn't welcome around their families. Sophia lost primary custody of Ellie, her secret income from Ray, and her savings account. She's had to move out of our house and into a small apartment because she can no longer afford her share of the mortgage payments. She's working double shifts at the store just to cover her basic expenses and legal fees. Most importantly, Ellie is safe from Ray's surveillance and Sophia's poor judgment. She's living with me full-time now, and she's no longer being used as a source of information for someone who was essentially stalking our family. I know some people might think my response was extreme, but I want to be clear about something. These people weren't just lying to me about money or having an emotional affair. They were engaging in a pattern of behavior that involved my 8-year-old daughter. Ray was paying for information about a child's daily activities and using that information to conduct surveillance of her. Sophia was facilitating this arrangement despite knowing it required secrecy and deception. That crosses a line that I will never tolerate, and I have no regrets about making sure they both faced serious consequences for their actions. The best part? I did all of this completely legally and ethically. I simply documented their behavior, shared that documentation with the appropriate people and institutions, and let the natural consequences unfold. I didn't have to break any laws or engage in any questionable tactics. Their own actions provided everything I needed to destroy their lives. Ray and Sophia thought they were so clever with their secret arrangement. They thought they could lie to their spouses, hide money, and use my daughter for their own purposes without facing any real consequences. They were wrong,